You're listening to the Telltale channel. Don't forget to check me out on all social media: Patreon, Twitter, Teespring, and Etsy. All links can be found in the description or on my website, telltaleatheist.com. So the first article I want to take a look at tonight is entitled "Black Lives Matter Leader Slams Pat Robertson for Calling Movement Anti-God, quote-unquote." This is by Hemant Mehta, so let's give the article a read and see what it has to say. On Thursday, during an episode of the 700 Club, Pat Robertson echoed fear-mongering conservative rhetoric against Black Lives Matter. He said the radical movement, quote-unquote, which goes beyond the organization itself, is more interested in destroying the country than countering oppression. You can hear it around the 15:45 mark. I think I actually downloaded this video. Let me see.
It's amazing.
Yeah, I did. I got this video. Let me pull it up real quick. All right, let's listen to this video and see what Pat Robertson had to say.
Well, it's amazing that these athletes are getting sucked into this, and so-called fellow travelers and even businesses. But, the athletes used to be terribly, admired by all of society. They had a very, very positive rating. That rating has gone to negative because of their association with Black Lives Matter.
So what Pat said here just now is an objectively verifiable claim. We can find out, we can find the data one way or another if it's true that athletes who support Black Lives Matter, their supporters fall away based on that endorsement of Black Lives Matter. I'm skeptical about whether or not that's true, and I don't know how you'd even go about finding out if their supporters fell away as a result of their endorsement of Black Lives Matter or not. And I'm also not really sure why that matters in the first place. Sometimes the right thing to do is not the popular thing to do. Anyway, let's continue.
Association with Black Lives Matter. It's not just the statement. Of course, Black Lives Matter. Of course, we care about oppression against poor people. Everybody who's got any sense would do that. They don't like police brutality or some of those things.
I'm so fascinated by the fact that he just said that. That is not how a lot of members of the Republican Party feel. I've talked to people who cheer when they see police brutality. I have watched people smile as they watch some really disturbing shit. And it's, in my experience, not a small segment of the population. I'm not sure is Pat that out of touch that he doesn't realize that that is basically the entirety of the evangelical voting bloc, his voting bloc, that he basically leads. He doesn't realize that that's how they feel. This is bizarre.
But that legitimate thing has been hijacked by these radicals, and they're using that label to put forth an agenda, and people need to be aware of it. They're talking about Marxist communism. They're talking about destroying the nuclear family. They're talking about destroying essentially Christianity as being racist.
Who's talking about this? Who wants to do this? I don't understand. Black Lives Matter? Who in the organization has stated that as their goal? What has given him the idea that this is what they stand for? This is what they want to do. The organization Black Lives Matter, like the organizational structure, I'm not a huge fan. They've said and done some things as an organization that I'm not really a fan of. I don't really like some of the things they've said and done. But they have an overarching cause that I can stand behind. The point is, black people in the U.S. are mistreated in a lot of different ways by the police, by the justice system, by our foundational structures. It doesn't even have to be intentional. In a lot of cases, it's not intentional. It's a byproduct of the system that we live in. Like, if every human involved in the justice system, every juror, every judge, every lawyer, everybody, if they were all robots, it wouldn't matter. There would still be a racist outcome, a racist byproduct of the system. It doesn't need people to be involved for the system to produce racist outcomes. It's nobody's fault necessarily. I'm not saying it's anybody's fault necessarily that this is what's happening, but it's a problem that needs to be solved. I don't know why we can't all get on board with that. That's what the science says. Let's look at the science and figure out if this indeed is causing, outcomes that disproportionately affect black people, and see if we can solve that problem. You don't have to feel like you're guilty of anything. You don't have to take the blame for anything. Just take an objective, honest look at the system and figure out how it can be fixed. Why is that so difficult? I don't get it.
All the way through, they want to upend the capitalist structure and destroy America.
I have not heard Black Lives Matter say anything about that. I have absolutely no clue what he's talking about here.
Now, if some athlete wants to get an endorsement, if I were a corporate head, I wouldn't give 10 cents to pay him to endorse my product. Why would I want Colin Kaepernick to endorse Wheaties or whatever it is I'm selling? But I think some of the big corporations are going along. But people need to understand that this is a stalking horse for a very, very radical anti-family, anti-God agenda.
Okay. I find it fascinating that somebody who claims to follow Jesus, a peace-loving hippie for all intents and purposes, is so fervently in favor of a stick that you can point at somebody and end their lives instantly. Why would a Christian be in favor of something that would cause you to be blood guilty in the eyes of Christianity, in the eyes of Jesus? I do not get it. It's like the version of Jesus that Christians in the U.S. follow is so bastardized. It is the most bizarre shit I've ever seen in my life.
Whoever's watching, people should be aware that they're not just standing with the poor, oppressed black people. Of course we want to stand with oppressed people against police brutality. Of course we do.
Again, that is inaccurate. I'm sorry, the Republican Party, the leadership of the Republican Party, does nothing but deny, pretend that this shit is not happening. Pretend that there is no racism in the U.S. that needs to be addressed. They pretend that there is no police brutality, and they come out in favor of the police when they're caught red-handed beating somebody's face in with a club. I don't understand how he can sit here and say, of course we do, when the entire institution behind him is contradicting him. It's almost like gaslighting. Of course you don't. Of course the Republican Party and the leaders of the Republican Party don't give a shit about this situation. They are actively supporting police who are violating people's human rights and beating people, beating protesters, peaceful protesters. Like, this is bizarre. How is he coming to this conclusion in the first place?
Of course we do. But we don't want to go along with a lesbian, anti-family, anti-capitalist, Marxist revolution. We don't want that for America.
A lesbian... What was it? Here, let's listen again.
Anti-family, anti-capitalist, Marxist revolution.
A lesbian revolution. Interesting. Okay. So Pat Robertson thinks that there is a lesbian revolution taking place right now as we speak, and it's being led by Black Lives Matter. I honestly don't even know what to say to that. Let's continue reading the article by Hemant Mehta. Where is this coming from? The BLM website is unapologetically inclusive of LGBTQ people, especially black trans women, and welcoming of different family structures beyond the traditional father-led stereotype. Some conservatives have taken that in bad faith to mean they're out to destroy America as we know it, when the reality is they're trying to create a space for more Americans, the ones who have historically lacked power and a voice. So when Robertson says they want to upend the capitalist structure, that's a reference to activists who argue that our current system of capitalism hasn't worked for a hell of a lot of people, and they're right. When Robertson says they want to destroy the family, the truth is BLM wants to expand what we think of when we talk about families. They're making a valid point. When Robertson says they're anti-God, he's just using shorthand for people who don't subscribe to his brand of conservative Republican Jesus. Robertson is hardly the first to make these kinds of statements, but because of his prominence among right-wing Christians, yesterday, Patrisse Cullors, one of the founders of the BLM movement, directly spoke out against Pat Robertson's ignorance and hate. So this is a quote straight from one of the founders of the BLM movement. Quote, "The statements made by Pat Robertson are completely inflammatory and dangerous. People are hurting all across this country due to the carelessness of comments made by individuals like Pat Robertson. At what point do these individuals who walk alongside him stop and say, enough is enough with the sexist, misogynistic, and supremacist way of displaying the bigotry that continues to flow from the souls of many of our leaders? Christianity was built on empathy, not hate. Until hate and racism is eradicated, America will continue to be a divided nation. It's our hope that Pat Robertson and anyone else who believes we're destroying Christianity with our work would join us in our movement as we'll continue to galvanize these moments of division and false character accusations as fuel to move our country and world forward." Fascinating. So that was their response, basically, or that's one of the co-founders' responses to what Pat said. The country is becoming more and more polarized as time goes on to a disturbing degree. People are moving further left and further right and using that division to justify continuing to move even further and further. The extreme right-wing people are seeing the left-wing people and saying, oh my God, they're extremists, they're nuts, we got to do something, and becoming all alarmist and moving even further right as a result. It is continuing to galvanize and polarize, and it's a problem that needs to be solved and addressed. And if it isn't solved and addressed, it's going to end in disaster. The fact that the country is so divided right now is going to end in disaster if it isn't addressed. Let's continue reading. This is Hemant Mehta speaking. "The bottom line is this. If Pat Robertson's religion can be destroyed by activists fighting for racial justice, then his religion deserves to be eradicated. But many Christians, including plenty of BLM activists themselves, would argue that their faith inspires them to fight for these values. There's nothing about Black Lives Matter that's incompatible with Christianity, unless you're the sort of person who thinks voting for a Democrat amounts to heresy." Hemant Mehta seems to kind of be hinting at the fact that Republicanism and Christianity are inextricably linked at this point in time. Religion and politics are almost impossible to tell apart anymore. That's bad.